A lot of the work that keeps systems safe does not look important until the day it is. It's a pin commit hash, a safer config rollout, a cleaner restart, a daemon that starts before the app does, an IP range nobody can use your token from outside of. None of that is sexy. All of it matters. Hey, I'm Brian Teller. I work in DevOps and SRE, and I run Teller's Tech. This is Ship It Weekly, where I filter the noise and focus on what actually changes how we run infrastructure and own reliability. Show notes and links are on shipitweekly.fm. If the show's been useful, follow it wherever you listen. Ratings help way more than they should. And if you want more signal between episodes, check out oncallbrief.com. We have 5 main stories today, then the lightning round, and we'll wrap with the human closer. We're starting with GitHub Actions and Kubernetes, because the helper layer is officially part of the trust boundary now. Then Airbnb, with one of the better real-world platform stories I've seen in a while on shipping config changes safely. After that, Cloudflare open sourcing the graceful restart plumbing behind zero downtime upgrades for Rust services. Then AWS ECS managed daemons, which is a nice clean platform engineering story. And finally, HCP Terraform getting more serious about narrowing access with IP allow lists and temporary AWS permission delegation. Story 1. GitHub Actions is not just CI anymore. Let's start there because I think the easy part of GitHub Actions is over. On this week's on-call brief, we flagged that Kubernetes-related repositories are moving towards full 40-character SHA pinning for actions, with non-compliant workflows set to fail after April 15th. That sounds like a tiny implementation detail right up until you remember how many teams got burned by mutable tags and trusted automation over the last year. And the broader GitHub direction lines up with that. GitHub's 2026 Action Security Roadmap is basically one big admission that CI and workflow automation are part of the software supply chain now. GitHub says the roadmap includes dependency locking for workflows, centralized policy controls, and Actions data stream for observability, and egress controls for hosted runners. GitHub's security team also said this week that recent attacks are increasingly about exfiltrating secrets, and that many of them start by compromising a workflow on GitHub Actions. That's the story. Not GitHub added a security feature. More like the industry has finally stopped pretending build automation is some layer off to the side. If a workflow can publish artifacts, push code, assume cloud roles, or touch secrets, then it is part of the trust boundary, period. So the practical takeaway is pretty simple. If you are still using broad version tags or workflows that nobody has really reviewed in a while, the platform is telling you where this is going. The old convenience model is getting squeezed out. And honestly, good. It probably should. Story 2. Airbnb built the kind of config platform people say they want. Next up, Airbnb. I really like this one because it is not hype. It is not we added AI to configs. It is just good platform work. Airbnb wrote about its internal dynamic config platform, Sitar. The basic idea is to make runtime config changes safer without making them painfully slow. Their setup uses a Git-based workflow by default, schema validation and review before rollout, staged rollouts, fast rollback, and a separation between the control plane and the data plane. On the service side, there's an agent sidecar and a local cache. So services can keep running on the last known good config even if the back end is degraded. That's the kind of story I want more of. Because config is one of those places where teams love the flexibility right up until it becomes the outage. And the answer is usually not ban dynamic config. The answer is build the guardrails and the blast radius controls so the flexibility does not turn into roulette. The part I liked the most is the last known good behavior. This is such a real operator move. Not just our config platform is available, more like what happens to the service if the config backend is having a bad day. That's the right question. A lot of systems look fine until their control plane gets weird. Airbnb is clearly thinking past that. So yeah, For me, the takeaway here is the safe speed is real engineering work. It's not just vibes, it is staged rollout, rollback, validation, and not making every config change a big bang. Story 3. Cloudflare open sourced the restart plumbing nobody notices when it works. Now for one of my favorite kind of infra stories. Cloudflare open sourced a Rust library called Ecstasis that it says has been in production for 5 years and enables zero downtime upgrades across critical Rust services. Their write up says the point is to restart network services without dropping live connections or refusing new ones, even at Cloudflare scale. The way it works is a fork and exec handoff, where the child process inherits the listening socket, signals readiness, and only then does the parent stop accepting new work and drain existing connections. Cloudflare says that approach preserves millions of requests across its global network on every restart. This is exactly the kind of thing people outside ops do not think about much. But it matters, because just restart the service sounds clean until the service is live, handling real traffic, and the wrong restart behavior turns into a customer facing mess. The boring, invisible reliability work is usually where the real maturity is. Not in launch day demos, in the stuff that lets you patch, upgrade, and change things without making users feel it. And I also just like the honesty of the post. It walked through why the naive restart is bad, why so reuse port is not enough for graceful restarts, and why the socket handoff matters. That's real engineering. You can hear the battle scars in it. So if you run long-lived services, proxies, gateways, or anything else where restart behavior is part of reliability, this is a good reminder that restart logic is not housekeeping. It is production behavior. Story 4. Amazon ECS managed daemons is a good platform team feature. The AWS story this week is Amazon ECS managed daemons. And honestly, I think this is a better story than yet another agent announcement. AWS says managed daemons for ECS managed instances lets platform teams independently deploy and manage logging, tracing, monitoring, and security agents without bundling all of that into application deployments. AWS says ECS runs exactly one daemon task per managed instance, starts the daemon before application tasks are placed, drains it last, and supports rolling updates with rollback protection. There is no extra feature charge beyond the compute the daemon uses. That is clean. That is useful. And that is one of those features where the value shows up immediately if you've ever had to coordinate host level tooling through app teams that really do not want to think about your agent lifecycle. The part that I like is the separation of concerns. App teams own app rollout, platform teams own platform tooling. That should not be controversial, but a lot of environments still make those things trip over each other. So when AWS gives people a more explicit way to keep those concerns separate, that is worth paying attention to. And it fits the theme of the episode pretty well, too. Another background layer becoming more explicit, more managed, and a little less improvised. Story 5. HCP Terraform is narrowing access in the places people usually leave soft. The last main story today, HCP Terraform. HashiCorp announced 2 security features that I think fit together nicely, even though they came as separate updates. First, HCP Terraform now supports IP allow lists at the organization and agent level. HashiCorp says that means tokens are only accepted from trusted, predefined IP addresses, and that it closes a pretty obvious gap where valid credentials could previously be used from anywhere by default. HashiCorp also says agent pool allow lists can be scoped separately, which lets teams align access with real egress points like NAT gateways or trusted VPC egress. Second, AWS permission delegation is now generally available in HCP Terraform. HashiCorp says this uses AWS temporary permission delegation, so customers can grant trusted partners short-lived, customer-approved access for setup and onboarding tasks instead of handing out long-lived permissions. This is the kind of tightening I like. Nothing magical, nothing flashy, just narrower access and less standing privilege. And that is usually where a lot of the real security value lives anyway, not in adding another dashboard, in making the default trust path shorter and more explicit. So, the practical takeaway here is if your Terraform environment still feels a little too open by default, HashiCorp is giving teams some better primitives now. Network based restrictions and shorter lived delegated access are both good moves. A few quick ones before we wrap. GitHub secret scanning kept moving in March. GitHub says it added 28 new detectors from 15 providers, enabled push protection by default for 39 detectors, and added more validity checks. Then GitHub added secret scanning through the GitHub MCP server. So AI coding agents can scan changes for exposed secrets before you commit or open a pull request. GitHub Codespaces is now generally available for GitHub Enterprise Cloud with data residency. GitHub says it supports Australia, the EU, Japan, and the US, but requires enterprise or organization owned codespaces. User owned codespaces are not supported in that setup. And Kubernetes version 1.36 is closing off a couple of old footguns. The project says .spec.external IPs is deprecated because of long standing security risk. And the old Git repo volume driver is now permanently disabled because it could allow code execution as root on the node. I think the cleanest closer for this one is pretty simple. Failure is loud, prevention is quiet. SRE Weekly put it that way this week, and I think it lands because it's true. Enterprises do not usually underinvest in reliability because they hate reliability. They underinvest because outages scream and prevention whispers. Budgeting systems respond to noise. Prevention work often looks boring right up until the day it would have saved everybody a lot of pain. And that is basically the whole episode. Pinned actions are prevention. Safer config rollout is prevention. Graceful restarts are prevention. Managed daemons are prevention. And narrower Terraform access is prevention. None of that usually gets celebrated the way incident response does. But if you've ever been the person on the hook at 2 a.m., you already know which work matters more. And I think that is the human side of ops that sometimes gets lost. A lot of the best work we do is the stuff that nobody notices because nothing happened. No page, no rollback scramble, no emergency patch, no weird config blast radius, no restart turning into an outage, no token working from somewhere it never should have. That work counts, even when it is quiet, especially when it is quiet. All right, that's it for this week of Ship It Weekly. Quick recap. We talked about GitHub Actions hardening and why CI is part of the trust boundary now. Airbnb showing what safe config rollout actually looks like. Cloudflare open sourcing the restart plumbing behind zero downtime Rust upgrades. Amazon ECS managed daemons. And HCP Terraform tightening access with IP allow list and temporary AWS permission delegation. Links and show notes are on shipitweekly.fm. You can also find the video versions on YouTube. And if you want more signal before the episode, check out oncallbrief.com. If this episode was useful, follow or subscribe wherever you listen, and send it to the person on your team who keeps getting asked to move faster while quietly doing all of the work that keeps the background layers from becoming the next incident. I'm Brian, and I'll see you next week.